Hello, good afternoon, and welcome back to the Singapore Geospatial Week sessions. And we hope you had a good lunch. We are very pleased to have two of our Geotech members with us today. First, let me introduce Leong. He's Head of Business of APAC CityData. CityData is a geolocation service tracking people's movements via mobile SDKs. Leong, could you start your video and mic? Thank you very much. And he will share about CityDash data for humanity. And secondly, we have another Geotech member, that is Jeroen Borst. He's a program manager of TNO based in Netherlands, which is an organization for applied research. And he will share about the Brain for Corona initiative. First off, we will start with Leong, who will share about CityDash. Over to you, Leong.
Thank you, Vanessa. If I may, would you like, okay, I would like to share my screen. And this is just a 3 or 4 slide introduction, and I would then, jump into the platform and explain the work that we do. So CityData is, in essence, we actually collect people intelligence accurately. They're all anonymized and aggregated in a form where, it's not individual data that we're selling, right? We are a GovTech company based out of San Francisco, but headquartered in Asia, in Singapore as well. That's why we are, very honored to be part of GeoWorks and SLA's Geotech community. How it came about, this company was, there are a lot of use cases that needed data, whether you are a research institution, a health or a university, transportation, people mobility, economic development, urban planning. The thing is, we saw a gap where there is a lot of need, but there is very little data available, or accurate data available. Right? So we went about then working with many different data sources. A lot of them are based off the mobile phones and apps and app developers that we work with. So we collect a lot of what you call location data into our cloud. We process them on an ongoing basis. And we always have privacy compliance at the forefront of what we do. So we are GDPR compliant, we're CCPA compliant as well. Of course, in Singapore, PDPA. And we are very confident because we do not collect any personally identifiable information in our cloud, right? So part of the solution is to be able to collect anonymized, aggregated, large sets of data to then be able to make sense of people. 3 things, right? If you get away from today's session about us, is the presence, activity, as well as movement, right, of people. Since we started out on this journey about 5 years back, we've now scaled across 60 countries and over, 1,500 cities over the world, right? So this gives us a lot of, no pun intended, data, right, in the way you look at how people move within cities or within countries. So this is just a very short introduction of the company, and I will then go into the COVID-19 work that we've been doing, which is what we're here for today. Now, sometime in March, what happened was we were approached by many government research agencies, health institutions, right, very concerned about the effectiveness of their movement controls or lockdowns. And so we started working with some of these governments. Some are direct partnerships, while some are with our partners in these countries. And we started to provide anonymized people movement across cities, cities and provinces in different countries. We scaled it out gradually to about 11, 12 countries and tracking, kind of like bi-directional movement over 500 odd cities in all these countries. And with their blessing and permission, right, these partners, because we were providing them very fine, very granular data. So what we asked for in return was, could you allow us, to publish some of these aggregated on a weekly or even monthly basis, right? And put it out there so that it could be offered to academic institutions. So we got a lot of universities and professors coming to us for, some of these data and then doing other works out of it, right? And so this is a public website where we will publish all the movement pattern for, there are more countries, of course, but these are the countries, and some of them are actually provinces with very fine block groups and shapes that is publicly available, right? And if I were to look into, for example, where I'm based in Singapore, right? Now, what it means is Singapore is a city, country, state. So, if you were to look at these shapes, these are, we call them planning areas, neighborhoods, but in larger countries, it could be provinces or regions. And then we look at, the people that were either moving or not moving in each of the shapes. So for example, you would see like, most people and devices that we're looking at over a given period of time. In this case, is a 1 month scale, right? Most people stayed, right, over the course of the 10 weeks between our circuit breaker to when it was lifted in phase 1 and 2, right? And of course, there were some movements, and then we kind of like indexed it and put it into perspective where the percentages were very low or, were slightly higher than what we see normally across the entire nation. So this is one way of actually visualizing the data, right? The other way would be a matrix chart where, you can look at, so in this case, we call it provinces, but actually it's 55 planning areas. So you could see like the bi-directional movement between, Ang Mo Kio and Bukit Merah, for example. And we gave a code where, if you see a certain percentage that is slightly higher than the average, right, then it gives you a slightly warning signal or pattern where it might be a little bit too high, but it could be movement of essential workers and stuff like that. So, for us, it's the more green, right, during a lockdown, the more greens we see, I guess would be a more positive indication. And then it will allow, in other countries, it will allow public officials to actually kind of dive deeper into what's happening and why people are moving, and how to then go about planning medical resources or, looking at the effectiveness of the movement controls. This is another way of sort of looking at, people moving from one province or one neighborhood to other neighborhoods, and then the movement from other neighborhoods into, particular neighborhoods. So this is at a macro level where you look at a nation, right? And what you can do is within the platform itself, we also allow you to kind of zoom into, any particular area that you're looking at, for example, and we give you a very quick, like analysis of how many people we see within a particular neighborhood, right? And you could zoom into it and kind of figure out like, okay, this is the area that I'm interested in, and you could decide, I want to really look at a very specific area, and will allow you to actually, we were working with researchers to actually draw very specific polygons where these are COVID related or COVID affected zones, and then we would look at sort of like dispersion or movement of people within specific polygons or fences. So this is how we were working with, like I mentioned before, governments, research institutions, health officials. Some were direct and some were indirect relationships. And so this is our like our contribution, right, to what we call it civic duty or civic bent in us to actually provide this at baseline cost without going into too much of commercials here. And I will pass over to Vanessa and also Jeroen for them to talk about their
Thanks,
other
Leong. It's great to
initiatives.
see a geotech making these contributions. We would love to see more companies also contributing initiative for this COVID-19 times. Next up, we have Jeroen Borst from TNO to speak about the Brains for Corona initiative. Over to you, Jeroen.
Thank you. And I will also start sharing my screen. Let's see. If I can do that. Why can't I? Oh.
While Jeroen is setting up his slides, so maybe Leong, we could share a bit more about CityDash.AI. So do you have any case studies that you can talk about for Asia in the work with the healthcare organizations?
So it started off with some NGOs coming to us and very concerned about whether lockdowns were effective or not, whether people are still moving. So we did work with some governments and even in a very technical aspect of working with their contact tracing apps, and then helping them compare, because they intend to travel from one neighborhood to neighborhood A to neighborhood B has been made, but did the people really travel from A to B, or did they end up in C? So these were what we were helping various officials kind of like really tally, in a way tally and sort of make informed decisions where then how do they actually measure true people movement
so there's one question from attendee. What data visualization tools we use to build the dashboard?
So in our dashboard, for example, we use your common publicly available tool like combination of Google Map, Mapbox, even we reference to OneMap, and we layer all this data right on top of maps. But we also do work with government agencies where they already have their proprietary visualization tool, whether it's Kaggle or any other tool, and these data output can be sort of like extracted and transferred over for further analysis.
There's a question from Isis. Are the people movement metrics directional?
Yes, they're bidirectional. So it's like when you click on a certain neighborhood A, right? And then we will show you that we give you a percentage of the percentage of devices and people that we've seen in neighborhood B from neighborhood A as well. And then when you click on neighborhood B, then you get the reverse statistics. I hope I answered that.
Yeah, how did you obtain the data on people movements? That's a good question.
Oh, we work with thousands or if not tens of thousands of apps developers. And there's a value exchange. So in return for insights on how these apps, the users of the apps move, and some other geospatial related insight, we get anonymized and location data into our cloud, from all these different apps in different phones all over the world. We blend it, and so that's how we came about with being able to provide data at scale.
So in our conversations, you were mentioning that your CityDash.AI technology or platform can be used to also monitor movements in buildings. Is that correct? And not just outdoors. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the building, well, I would say yes, there's also a bit of challenge, because when you look at buildings, of course, you're looking at a very small area versus an open area. And if you're looking at vertical height, that could also pose a challenge. There are technical ways of getting around it with technology, Wi-Fi triangulation, etc. Very technical discussion, but there are ways to do that. So it's just how complex the request is, and we usually ask, like, what is your use case, so we can try and simplify the way the data has to be processed, and not necessarily try and complicate things if it doesn't have to be.
So in terms of data privacy, how would you, your company actually manage that?
Yeah, so we went through a very rigorous process. It involves legal teams and legal partners in Europe, in California, where we're based, looking through the entire GDPR and CCPA booklets, documents, and then making sure that the way we collect data is compliant, the way we store is compliant, and the way we present it and the way we market it, or like what I'm doing now, is compliant. And the main thing is there shouldn't be any, and there isn't any personally identifiable information in our cloud. So there'll be no names, no email addresses, no telephone numbers, no social security numbers, or device numbers and stuff like this.
Jeroen, I don't think we are able to see your slides. So while we try to get the slides up from our side, the one you sent for the urban panel, can you maybe share with the audience about your initiative as we flash your slides?
Yes, I can. I'm sorry. I don't know what is happening. Maybe good to start with who we are, being a research organization for the Netherlands, independent from government, working for the public and the private sector as well, with a very broad range of topics. We are divided in 9 different units, from defense to healthcare to ICT. And I am working in the unit traffic and transport. So we are specifically looking at the traffic and transport responses to COVID. And there are several initiatives that we've taken. One that I would like to share is COVID Mobility Works. That's an international initiative where we let me see. So here I'm back again. That's an international initiative where we collect all kind of cases. Here we are. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry that it works like this. What we did is we collected several cases. If you go to the 4th slide. Yeah. Here we built together with several not-for-profit organizations from around the world a platform where all kind of experiences and initiatives are shared, and so we can learn from around the world how the community, but also the private sector response to COVID-19 related to mobility. And one of the things that we see, that we investigate already, me in my program, is how we use public space and how we use it effectively, and what how much of the public space and infrastructure we share for mobility. Now with COVID, we see that there is a big change in how communities are using their public space to keep the economy open, while there has been a big disruption in mobility. So so that is so that is what we collect, and what we would like to share. What we like to collect is also other initiatives from Asia. And there is another initiative building further upon the building blocks that we are already building. That is what we see. Of course, there is a big change in mobility patterns during the COVID-19 pandemic. Due to the circuit breaker, or as we call it in Europe, the lockdown, much more people are working from home as much as they can. But we also see a shift in modalities from the private car, or from public transport to the private car and bike. And what we have noticed is that there is a very limited ability for especially the public authorities and the public transport providers to predict what is happening now that we are releasing these measures. So what the Social and Economic Council, the council that advises the government in the Netherlands, has noted that the combination of detailed statistical data on activities of individuals related to their personal characteristics, in combination with the TNO developed way of modeling and dealing with these detailed kind of data with preservation of privacy rules, is something that is needed to predict the effects of new measures or releasing measures in the future. So if you go to the next slide, there is one building block that we have been working on in order to understand how a community will respond to new forms of mobility. We already noted that you cannot train the mobility models on the existing mobility patterns if you want to understand disruptions. You have to investigate the underlying activities and how they are related to mobility. So what we built is an activity-based model for a large part of the Netherlands. And we built what we call a synthetic population with the same characteristics as the real population, with the same level of detail as what the Central Bureau of Statistics can measure. And we made it applicable to relate activities of individuals with their personal characteristics to mobility patterns. So if we change something in the lockdown or the circuit breaker, if we release measures on certain parts of the economy, let's say education or tourism, we can predict how that will affect mobility. Then there is another change in pattern, and therefore the next slide is very useful. Because we also see that there is a change in behavior in how we make use of public transport, for instance. So we already see a model shift, although the volumes are low, a model shift from public transport to car and bike in the Netherlands. And that is very essential to monitor that and to understand how what we call utility of public transport has changed over time, because that will allow us to predict better what will happen in the future if we release the measures with regards to COVID. Because if this this model shift maintains, even if a substantial number of people will keep working from home, it will potentially introduce congestion problems during longer periods of the day in the busier parts of the Netherlands, in the more urbanized areas. And in order to do that monitoring, to do that combination of modeling, making these models, complex models, applicable, and combine them with monitoring, we use the instrument Urban Strategy, and that is a platform in which we can bring together data and very fast simulation models in order to combine these prediction models and this monitoring data. And this building block, Urban Strategy, we apply that in Amsterdam, in our capital. We applied it in well, many cities around the world, but also in Singapore. I forgot to mention that in the hassle about the slides, but we are also present in Singapore. We are based in the Netherlands, but also present in Singapore and working with, well, some of the agencies and main universities in Singapore. Well, to mention LTA, for instance, or NEA, and universities NUS and NTA. So that is what I would like to share. Yeah.
Thank you. So let's welcome Yu Leong back as well, so we can continue the panel discussion. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and welcome to everyone again who just joined us to this special stay-at-home COVID panel edition. So Yu Leong and Jeroen, maybe I can start this by putting this question out. What are the challenges that you have faced in your line of work in gathering the data or explaining this data platform to the new clients that you are interacting with now?
Well, one of the challenges that we face is that in order to what I mentioned, to really monitor the model shift, if you look at the pace in which the changes take place, it's very essential to get the data well, very fast into the system. With regards to the use of the public roads, that's no problem. We can do that with a latency of 2 minutes. But when it comes to the public transport data, that's much more difficult because mainly also due to the privacy rules, there are many steps to be taken in order to get the data into the platforms. And I think that with CityData you will recognize this problem. So it's very difficult to get this learning cycle, as we call it, to get it running in a high pace.
Yeah, so I'll just add on, Vanessa. I think privacy is the main concern. You know, because when you are in crisis, you know, we saw many governments roll out a contact tracing, whether it's an app, whether it's a form on an app or QR codes. But we also kind of knew, and we felt that it would come to a point where, you know, the pandemic would be if this is over a sustained period of time, right, and things are slowly starting to get back to normal, right? Lockdowns are eased or lifted. The issue of privacy will always be front and center, right, with the end user. So it's about respecting the end user. I mean, whose data we are collecting, correct? Being sensitive about it right from the beginning, right? And then explaining the process because it's not easy. Like how do you collect it? How do you make sure that it's compliant? How do you even audit it? Right? These are very tough questions that we had to answer and really consult with privacy legal departments to actually make sure that there's process in place to do that. And then there's the data collection side where so much of it is coming in. How do we and we struggle, right? It's a real struggle to actually then prioritize, like which are the cities, which are the countries do we process and do we compute first, right? Or how are we gonna prioritize our time with this? Because after all, we're not like we're not a very big setup. Everything's done in the clouds, but there's still prioritization needed to in that aspect.
It's amazing work that the amount of work that CityData is doing for a small startup based in San Francisco. And how many people do you have right now to manage all the clients around the world?
We are very the team that's actually spread out across over the world. So my partner and CEO, and we have a very lean team in the US of 2 or 3. We have a team of about 7 or 8 out of Asia, between Singapore and Thailand. And then we have another team in Brazil, in South America. So we are kind of like spread across the 3 different continents, and so you get a best of like the golden time zones and 24-hour turnarounds and stuff like that. Yeah. So in total, we are about there are 15 going 16 of us in the company.
So we have a question from Isis. The movement data from mobile phone pings.
Mm-hmm.
He or she's trying to understand the representativeness of the data.
Yeah. So yes, location signals are pings. So what we do is we have our own. We have an SDK that we work with developers, and then when there is a change of state in a phone, because it's so advanced these days, right? That the way we collect is different from your typical ride-hailing apps. If you were to switch Google Maps on, for example, you would find that your battery drains very quickly in a matter of hours. So again, coming back to being sensitive and respectful to end users, right? Whether it's in the form of an app or an SDK in an app, we then tweak the way we collect, right, location signals by changes of state. So when you accelerate, is a change of state. That's one change of state. When you stop, is a change in state. And you can get pretty intelligent too, right? You can use the barometer of the phone. You can use the gyro thermometer of the phone. Between buildings, when lighting and the ambience changes, there's a change of state as well. So there are very intelligent and technical ways to collect data without intruding into the privacy of the end user.
So Jeroen, I know we're discussing that the topic of digital twins that we will also touch upon on another panel. So maybe you could also share a little bit here for the audience.
Yep. Yeah, thank you. Yep. As I showed the building block urban strategy, what we do there typically is that we make one data layer, all the data that you need to describe, well, you could say the static information of the city, where buildings are, specific locations, road infrastructures, the public transport infrastructure and also the how do you say, the underlying data, the movement patterns that we can collect from the city, from other sources. And together with that, we built, well, you could say the data layer. And on top of that, we have a layer of simulation models that allows us to interact with the data and see how the digital twin, as you might call it, if we visualize it, how the digital twin responds to certain changes. Before COVID, we applied it to investigate changes in, you could say, the urban fabric, in spatial planning, changes in mobility, introduction of new forms of mobility, mobility as a service or mobility on demand, or even in the future. What we also investigate, TNO, is higher levels of automation for cars. If you would introduce that to the city, depending on the proposition, how that would be used and how that also affects public space. That's what we build these digital twins for, and how they are applied. And also in Singapore, with 4 LTA, we build this digital twin for their electric bus operation planning.
It's quite interesting how we didn't really predict that this COVID-19 times would come. So it must have created a new business area and model for both your companies. So Jeroen, do you see any trends that comes out from the use cases that you have? Which Jeroen was mentioning that he sees a trend that people are using, transiting from public service transportation to more private transportation. So could you share from your side as well?
We do see some changes in how people move. Not necessarily so much of traffic mobility. It's more like people mobility, right? Very obviously during movement controls, you would see very little movement. But then you will also see that from a block group, correct, people moving to neighboring or near neighborhoods, right? They would strangely, they would actually travel further, right? For various reasons, and it's probably a reason of, you know, needing to get necessities of all sorts. And you will also see, I think it's also anecdotal, right? Where now there are a lot more people in the parks and nature reserves because, you know, they want to avoid
stay healthy.
Yeah, they want to. Yes, that's one, and you know, because of how the virus transmits itself, right? And it's less of a risk in open areas, so you can see more people are going to open areas, parks and reserves. Yeah, that's the main difference.
Well, I also have a question. Maybe you recognize, you see that in the data. In the Netherlands, when we look at the data, we see that now the use of the roads in total volume, when you look over the day, is almost back to where it was before the lockdown, before the circuit breaker. Use of public transport is a lot less, maybe around 50%, so that's really significant. But when we look at the how do you say, how it's the temporal spread, so basically there is no rush hour anymore. We used to see a very clear peak in the morning, a very clear peak in the evening, but now it's flattened out. Do you see the same patterns in your data?
Yeah, so areas where typically your density would be very, very high. For example, Raffles Place, MRT, City Hall, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
very, very.
I think possibly your company solutions may be very, very useful in malls at this point in time. Like people are just flocking to malls at this point in time.
So we see a reduction in typically very high density areas. And you know, it's like it's a validation of what you just said. And then private transport or the use of taxis on the road, correct, has gone back to normal or even increased. And it reflects on people's awareness of the situation that they're in, as well as them taking steps to safeguard their health and, you know, families and friends, and the consciousness of, you know, not trying to control the spread of the virus, right, by avoiding or going to less dense places to procure their services or, you know, exercise or recreation. Yeah.
So we have a question from Martin. Will smart street lampposts with multiple sensors help to acquire and aggregate more data?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the beauty of the platform and also with, I'm sure you will agree, you know, is the more data sets that you can supplement each other, the better, because there's no one perfect like source. You know, we specialize in this area, but, you know, we do work with, like, you know, previously I mentioned some government sort of sanctioned contact tracing apps. We get the anonymized data into our cloud. We did get the chance to work with even a very interestingly IoT devices. So in Europe, you know, you have your electrical vehicle charging stations, solar lighting panels and stuff, and, you know, all these in one way or another they do collect data, right? And we were able to kind of like fuse. Sorry, I wouldn't say fuse, but blend them in and look at a larger data set. Of course, there are complexities in trying to analyze different sources, but generally, the more data sets you have, the better. But the challenge is just basically to really make the comparison between SDK, GPS data versus cell tower data versus sensor data.
The question from Isis, was there also a reduction in movement in traffic before the movement controls were implemented?
Before movement control, sorry, was that directed at me? Okay, so I think I'm not quite sure. I think right up till movement control, right? Everything was still kind of like you know, situation normal, right? Nothing was out of the ordinary. But when you had that movement control and it's officially in place, whether it's, you know, in our country or any other country, yes, you will see a significant reduction or drastic change in.
You did the same, Jeroen?
Yeah, we see the same. Basically overnight. After the lockdown was announced, we call it a lockdown in the Netherlands. Yeah, we see the overnight change. So there was not a, we couldn't predict it. You didn't see, you saw normal patterns. Lockdown was announced, and then you saw the change. Yeah, it was really disruptive.
So I'd be curious to also find out for both of you, when you started building this platform for the COVID-19 people movement analysis, were there any other skill sets that you find that your team has to expand in? What kind of resources that you have to bring in additionally just to build this platform, if any? Was there any expansion in your AI or machine learning capabilities on your team, for example?
Well, basically, what we had to do, you could say, well, it's a bit difficult to explain, but we are a research organization. So we are working on the more fundamental steps like activity-based modeling and this population synthesis. And we have the more applied urban strategy. And you could say before the COVID-19 situation, these tracks were a bit separated. We were doing our modeling with the current system urban strategy. And then we said, well, okay, we are building this for the long term. And then COVID-19 hit, and then we said, well, okay, we really have to speed up to make what we already know and what we already have, to make it applicable very, very fast, much more faster than what was on our roadmap. So it basically it really accelerated the making it applicable what we had in the laboratory, you could say. And is that a bit different? It's basically the same people, but they're doing a bit different things. Closer, bringing it to a higher technology readiness levels in a higher pace.
In a more compressed time. So for
in a
example,
more
in
compressed
startups
time,
and agile organizations, they would use what's already been built, and then you pivot it into another product or expand it to become a new platform entirely, isn't it? Would that be the same for yourself as well? You look into sort of experience in this area?
Oh, very interestingly, it's almost like a reversal, role of reversal. We are not researchers, right? And we are like geeks, or we're like nerds, right? So we understand technology. But then when we had to work with researchers, the main question was, what is the ground truth? So we had to figure out and think like a researcher. You know, if there were these number of devices here, and this is not the complete coverage, right? So what would the ground truth be? So we have to figure out how to get as near to the ground truth as possible. And therefore, machine learning, you know, I wouldn't say AI, but machine learning really helped, because you would have to look at different, you know, you have to really go scout and sort of like you know, research, desktop research, like airport passenger arrival numbers, stadiums with football attendances, tickets to, I don't know, concerts, and publicly available data where they will give you the truth, right, to what the ground, the data of the ground particular area would be, and then looking at what you have and kind of like tweaking your algorithms along the way to make sure that this is a certain formula for these certain types of block groups, and this is another different formula for these other type of block groups. So you have to, like you say, you stretch yourself in a way where, you know, you have to think like a researcher, and in your case, you probably have to think about how to make use of technology better.
So you know, pre-COVID, would you say that your industry specialization in terms of target audience and clients would be completely different from what you have now post-COVID?
There is a slight, but it's not dramatic. It's just a slight difference, right? Because we are a GovTech company after all. So we've been working with urban planners, councils, right? City planning councils. It's just that now that clientele has broadened a lot to health and research institutions, and because we opened this data set out, right? So that we had a lot of requests, and we did a lot of calls with universities and the professors and the alumni, and you know, they're very interested because they were all reaching out to kind of like, they had a common goal of looking at data sets, and then taking what we have, making it better maybe, or looking at it from a different angle, and then, you know, it will go back to the authorities or in one way or another. So it kind of like broadened our base of clientele in a sense.
So, you know, one last question. What innovation are both of you most excited about in the line of work? What would you like to see move along more in terms of data collection or geospatial innovation, which can help your work to deliver your work to your clients?
Well, what we see in the Netherlands, at least, is that how do you say, especially from the side of the public transport operators, there was a very large reluctancy to provide data, and you could almost say that they use the privacy rules not having to share the data. Now with COVID, they see the importance of data sharing on different levels of the government, the public transport operators. So now we are much more thinking together with each other, how can we respect the privacy rules and make use of the data in order to have to secure accessibility in the future. And I don't know if that's an innovation, but it speeds up a lot, well, the way of working and the improvement in the field, you could say.
So we had so many sessions with different speakers, and they all came to the same conclusion. A lot of the work has been sped up, as well as interagency and inter-partners collaboration. So do you feel the same, Jeroen, as well in this aspect?
Yeah, I do. Generally, I think in a crisis, right, it tends to bring out the better side of human beings, and everyone is working, of course, towards a common goal, and the hope and the wish is it stays that way, correct?
Yes, after COVID, that we can still continue working together.
Yeah, together. Yeah. You know, so back to the innovation part, I think for us, it would be a dream to actually create a data marketplace where it's truly open, right? Because there are data marketplaces out there, but they're kind of like closed or gated, but one that's truly open. And again, with privacy at the forefront of whatever you do, right? So that's most important to us. These two things have to come hand in hand. And once people know that their data or your data is being treated with utmost respect and not just, simply traded, around the world, then I guess you will have more people willing to come forth and share, for the better good.
Also, in your work, do you use a lot of supercomputers to process the data?
For us, it mainly with Amazon and install cloud. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I have a question from Hong Jie Chang. In blending multiple data sources, what were the key challenges faced and how did you address them? Good question.
Blending multiple data sources. So because they come from different sources, and I'll just simplify it, right? You have different identifiers, right? Because even though they're anonymized, you have to have an identifier. So the way you create identifiers are different amongst different data sets, right? And then how do you go about deduplicating them? So then you have to unravel and sort of like decrypt some of the identifiers and then compare the data sets, dedupe the ones that you know are common, and then re-encrypt them, right? So that it becomes a common, uniquely unique identifier data set. Did I answer that question?
All right, thanks very much, gentlemen, for joining us for this panel and for the attendees as well. We do have the Grab workshops, so do join us for the next session, as well as Microsoft will be giving a sneak preview of the HoloLens 2, which it's already launched actually in Asia and around the world. Thank you very much for joining us, and stay safe, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.